everybody. My name is Carolina, and for our first theory workshop discussion, I'm going to be speaking on cognitive dissonance. So, let's get into it. There once was a story told by Aesop that went like this. A fox one day spied a beautiful bunch of ripe grapes hanging from a vine trained along the branches of a tree. The grapes seemed ready to burst with juice, and the fox's mouth watered as he gazed longingly at them. The bunch hung from a high branch, and the fox had to jump for it. The first time he jumped, he missed it by a long way. So he walked off a short distance and took a running leap at it, only to fall short once more. Again and again he tried, but in vain. Now he sat down and looked at the grapes in disgust. "What a fool I am," he said. "Here I am wearing myself out to get a bunch of sour grapes that are not worth gaping for." And he walked off very scornfully. This story can very easily represent cognitive dissonance, and we're going to talk about it and see why. Cognitive dissonance can be described as the distressing mental state caused by inconsistency between a person's two beliefs or even an action and a belief. Take our story of the fox, for example. He believed that he wanted the grapes, but then later walks away from them. This demonstrates our definition. When the fox changed his attitude towards his grapes, his longing for them also changed. The tension that is caused by cognitive dissonance is the feeling that we tried to avoid. So because of this, when it starts to arise, people will either change their belief or their action like the fox did. This tension or discomfort is triggered when a person's beliefs are contradicted by new information that is being presented. Therefore, one will try to remove any and every contradiction to reduce the tension or discomfort. The theory of cognitive dissonance was first introduced in the mid-1950s by American psychologist Leon Bessinger. The main idea of the theory is that if people feel dissonance, they will either seek to find new information that reduces this feeling, or they will change their actions and beliefs to lessen the feeling of tension. People are likely to try and avoid any and all information that increases or even causes the feeling of dissonance. Bessinger, in his book, A Theory of Cognitive Dissonance, writes that cognitive dissonance can be seen as an antecedent condition which leads to activity oriented towards dissonance reduction, just as hunger leads to activity oriented towards hunger reduction. This shows us that Bessinger believed that people who experience dissonance either try to reduce it, flee from it, or avoid it altogether. Before cognitive dissonance theory, there were other theories similar to it. For example, the congruity theory. This theory was reported in the mid-50s like cognitive dissonance theory. It states that there will be attitude change within a person if there are two contradicting elements like information, concepts, or even other people. If the judgment of the two must be made by one person, then they will experience pressure. The pressure is developed because of the feeling that they might have to change their judgment to better fit the more appealing side of the two. The theory demonstrates that if there is an inconsistency between what the person already knows and the information that they are being told, then they will either change their existing knowledge or will evaluate the new information. It has been studied that after people make their choice between the two, they find what they have chosen attractive and find the unchosen choice unappealing. While this may be true, Bessinger, in his theory of cognitive dissonance, suggests that the dissonant feeling of tension mostly arises after the decisions have already been made. The underlying term in the theory of cognitive dissonance is the word cognition. Cognition is the process of gaining information to better understand it through thoughts, experiences, and one's senses. Cognitions can either be dissonant or consonant. This means that any cognitions that clash with one another are said to be dissonant. However, cognitions that work with one another are called to be consonants. When there is new cognition presented to someone that appears to be dissonant cognition to them, they tend to form tension or discomfort, better known as the state of dissonance. There is also the thought that some cognitions are considered to be irrelevant, meaning that two or more cognitions presented do not relate to each other. Many say that the studies have proven that people tend to prefer consonant cognitions rather than cognitions of dissonance, and those are called irrelevant. When someone is introduced to information that they find to increase dissonance or prove to be irrelevant, they are likely to ignore or deny the information altogether. The main way to reduce dissonant cognitions in one's life is to replace them with consonant cognitions, and even to reduce the exposure to dissonant conditions. The dissonant feeling that is caused by two counteracting thoughts or action can cause a more dramatic feeling of tension depending on the importance of the topic. This will vary from person to person. While some people might find one thing very important, another group might not find it important at all. If someone deems something as important, like beliefs, knowledge, and attitudes, the dissonant feeling would be greater. This is because the beliefs, knowledge, or attitudes have been considered important in the mind of someone. As the elements increase in importance, yet are conflicting, the feeling to decrease the tension, feeling of dissonance, increases. Fessinger tells us that people will try to change any type of cognitive element in order to reduce the feeling of dissonance. Fessinger, in one of his studies, came to the conclusion that people will try to justify their chosen element to reduce the feeling of dissonance. There are several other ideas that can be involved when it comes to cognitive dissonance. For example, selective exposure. This is the idea that people will avoid information that can possibly create tension from cognitive dissonance because it does not align with their current beliefs or viewpoints. Selective exposure is one of the three ideas or three mental mechanisms that people will use to ensure that they are living in harmony without tension. Oxford research tells us that selective exposure has a tendency for both consciously and unconsciously to seek out material that supports their existing attitudes and opinions, and to actively avoid material that challenges their views. More broadly, audiences may seek congruence with their predispositions, including any aspect of their identity. Some psychologists have argued that individuals selectively screen out information to avoid cognitive dissonance. However, German psychologist Dieter Frey proved in his studies this tension or avoidance effect doesn't happen if the information that is being heard does not pose a threat. This would be a threat to one's beliefs or actions. Another mental mechanism that is used to reduce the anxious feeling of cognitive dissonance is post-decision dissonance. Post-decision dissonance is something that I feel like we all experience. This is the idea that people experience strong doubt or regret after making a decision that was either important or a close call and now is difficult or even impossible to reverse. Former Stanford University social psychologist Leon Fessinger said that these close-call decisions can generate huge amounts of internal tension, but that there are three conditions that heighten this tension. First, how important is the issue? Second, how long does it take one to choose their option? And third, the harder it is to reverse the decision after it's been made. With all of this in mind, one can easily see how this type of decision making can cause tension, resulting in avoidance of making these decisions. The third mental mechanism can be summed up into one simple word: compliance. This is also known as public conformity, to another's expectation without necessarily having a private conviction that matches the behavior. According to the American Psychology Association, the forced compliance effect is the tendency of a person who has behaved in a way that contradicts his or her attitude to subsequently alter the attitude to be consistent with the behavior. It is one way of reducing cognitive dissonance. All three of these mental mechanisms or ideas that people use to avoid cognitive dissonance prove how powerful the tension truly is. People have also studied that self-justification and theories of self-concept have proven to play another major role in the study of cognitive dissonance. In layman's terms, self-concept theory is the overall view of who one is according to self through cognitive judgments, like self-esteem. According to Jeff Stone and his study found in the National Library of Medicine, people with low self-esteem are less likely to feel the tension of dissonance rather than those who have higher self-esteem. This is because people form and regulate their self-concept as time passes and knowledge is gained. While self-concept is not self-esteem, it does play a big role in the shaping of one's concept of self. For example, self-concept helps one better learn things that they like, specific tendencies or habits, and possibly their weaknesses. Self-esteem, on the other hand, is a component of self-concept because it demonstrates one's confidence or lack thereof for things that they like, tendencies, habits, and weaknesses. Self-esteem helps determine one's self-concept and can either increase or decrease dissonant feelings by being allowed to be involved in hard decision-making. This theory is also important when it comes to the 7 traditions of communication. Cognitive dissonance is created by psychological inconsistencies. This means that within the traditions where there is a problem, cognitive dissonance peeks through. The most likely pair for the tradition and cognitive dissonance theory is the socio-psychological condition. Most of the work within this tradition can be characterized by having a focus on persuasion and attitude change and is divided into 3 large branches. One of these branches is cognitive. According to the book Theories of Human Communication, this cognitive branch centers on patterns of thought and concentrates on how individuals acquire, store, and process information in a way that leads to behavioral outputs. This goes to show us that individuals and society are linked with one another, meaning that one's personal beliefs can be in conjunction with their public behavior. This behavior sometimes is changed based on compliance and other mechanisms discussed above. The other tradition that I could see cognitive dissonance affecting is the sociocultural tradition. Within the sociocultural tradition, people study how people relate to culture as a whole rather than just within themselves as individuals. Cognitive dissonance, when paired with this tradition, goes to show how people change their attitudes and behaviors when involved or introduced to new or different cultural groups and ideas. According to Pennsylvania State University, people are most comfortable at a stable state, and anything that disrupts this causes a great deal of stress, so avoidance or changes are made to get back to consonance. All of this shows us that when two become paired together, avoidance is more likely to take place. One way that cognitive dissonance is being used in research is by studying how the choices that people have made during the pandemic ended up being more political rather than medical. This shows us cognitive dissonance because people were making their decisions not based on life or death, but rather cognitive realities that are causing feelings of dissonance. One article suggests that when this theory is paired with the pandemic, that the way we answer these questions has monumentous implications for our health as individuals. Because of the unconscious motivation to reduce dissonance, The way we answer these questions has repercussions for how we behave after making our initial decision. This means that people are making their decisions on the pandemic health issues based on their cognitive feelings rather than true medicinal importance. People avoiding the information of true risk of COVID and choosing to do as they please is easily related to cognitive dissonance. One article in Psychology Today writes that by identifying the choices that one makes through cognitive dissonance to rationalize things, you are able to better understand others and their choices. It is important to be understanding of others, especially during difficult times like the pandemic, because everyone around you is simply trying to decrease dissonance and increase consonance. While the pandemic is still present, but not nearly as publicized or rampant, it is still affecting psychology and communication. With this in mind, we should revisit the basic idea of cognitive dissonance in order to better understand. Simply put, it is the tension or discomfort felt when two or more cognitions are conflicting with one another. All of this to say that because of the pandemic and because of Fessinger's theory, we are able to better understand why people make the choices they make, especially during devastating times like the pandemic. Cognitive dissonance is something that I believe affects everyone in all of society today. Be it extreme or mild, there is little to no way to decrease this feeling. While many of us may be able to relate to this theory, others may not. I believe that this practical activity will demonstrate to each that cognitive dissonance is likely present in your life. So now what we're going to do is these are PDFs that have been made for cognitive dissonance, and I'm just going to read them out loud, and they're going to be on the screen right here. And A is yes and B is no. So I'm going to have it right here on the screen, and we're just going to agree or disagree with the statements. A is yes and B is no. Number 1, texting while driving is dangerous. Number 2, it is important to stay informed about proposed legislation that affects my community. Number 3, soft drinks or sodas are unhealthy beverages. Number 4, poverty is a serious problem that needs to be addressed. And number 5, smoking is an unhealthy behavior. So now we're going to complete a behavior survey, and what you're going to do is similar to the last survey. A is yes and B is no. And what you're going to do is indicate whether or not you have performed any of the following behaviors by circling A for yes or B for no, or writing it down, or however you want to do it. So number 1, I text when I am driving. Number 2, I am able to name at least one bill affecting my community that was passed in the last year by the legislators in my county or my state. Number 3, I drink soft drinks or sodas. Number 4, within the last year, I have donated money or engaged in volunteer work to address the problem of poverty. Number 5, within the last year, I have smoked a cigarette. So your answers to the survey above are going to depend whether you feel tension or cognitive dissonance or not. So for the first one, if I text when I'm driving, if you answered yes, you should be feeling some sort of tension or cognitive dissonance. If you said no to I'm able to name at least one bill, then you're probably having that same feeling. If you answered yes to I drink soft drinks or sodas, you probably have that feeling of tension, knowing, like in the previous slide, the attitude worksheet, how bad sodas are for you. Number 4, within the last year, I've donated money or engaged in volunteer work to address the problem of poverty. If you'd answered no to this, then that same cognitive dissonance is arising, because in the previous survey you answered yes, that poverty is a problem most likely. And then number 5, within the last year I have smoked a cigarette. If you answered yes to this, then you're probably also feeling that same feeling of tension or cognitive dissonance, knowing the unhealthy addiction that it can cause. Now that we have completed both surveys and discussed the answer choices that might cause tension that's been so heavily discussed throughout this presentation, if you felt like you answered yes to any of this, that you felt this tension, that's okay. And here's why. There are 4 main ways to address cognitive dissonance in your life, according to Dr. Newhouse. Number 1 is mindfulness. The first step to avoiding cognitive dissonance is recognizing that you have it. Number 2 is challenges. You must understand and know your beliefs and values. Without a full grasp on this, you are more likely to be bombarded with tension in your emotions. Sometimes in order to know these better, you must challenge your views and beliefs, and this can be hard. Number 3, you must consider the importance of dissonant thoughts. Sometimes this information can seem and feel so important at first, but at a second glance, it is not life-altering. Number 4, behavior. We may perceive dissonance when we engage in new behavior. For example, when we decline an invitation to an event we might attend in order to protect our leisure time. While this can feel uncomfortable at first, it is helpful to reflect on the reasons behind our behavior. I really hope that this presentation has been helpful to you in helping you understand yourself and other theories and how cognitive dissonance is affecting communication theories as a whole, as well as how it's impacting research and people and their lifestyles. So thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions, please comment back, and I would love to talk with you about it. Thank you so much again for watching. I hope you have a good day. Bye bye.